So you see, when I start my Minikube, you can see that the entire set of all the control services have clearly started. It's basically using a slightly older version because I have not upgraded it the last 2-3 months. Okay? So it's very likely it's not as latest as what you would have when you install it today. So I'm running a very simple local Minikube cluster directly on my Windows, so I don't need any additional tools and things like that. That's the first demo we are talking about. Now if I want to see how the cluster performs, I'll just use another window to start my dashboard. So I'm going to say use PowerShell as a dashboard, and I'm going to say Minikube dashboard. So this basically opens up the dashboard for me to show how my cluster status is, what are the different kind of services that is running, what are the images that I have in my cluster, all those health checks, monitoring, observability, all comes into one single integrated dashboard. So that's sort of easy for me to look at it. Okay? So I'll wait for this to run. In the meanwhile, I want to see if my cluster is still healthy. So I can say Minikube status, that tells me how my cluster is running. So when I give a Minikube status command, you can see it tells me all the 6 things that we spoke about in the control plane. So my kubelet is fine, my API server is fine, config files are fine, and the control plane is also running. Of course, it doesn't tell anything about etcd because that's an internal memory. Okay? So everything seems fine. And you see my dashboard has started. It usually opens up in the port 22018, and it shows me the cluster dashboard, something like this. So this basically tells me that I have a very simple Kubernetes cluster. There's no daemons yet, there's no deployments yet. And once I start doing deployments, you will start seeing entities here. At the moment, there is no pods either. It's a very empty dashboard. That's fine. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start giving client commands. Okay? So if you want to see how many pods you have anytime, you say kubectl. This is the very minimal client tool. Okay? And then you can say get nodes. Okay? So this gets you any physical nodes that are available. At the moment, there's only the cluster node. You can say get deployment. This gets you all the deployment. Okay? So if there is any deployment, it lists. If you want the pods, you can list for pods. So this basically gives you all the basic get commands. But because I'm very lazy, I will always say get all so that I can see everything, including the replica sets if there are any. Okay? So this is how I try to get information from my client. So your kubectl is a brilliant way to look at these kind of files and statuses. Now, if you want to create a deployment, you're going to say kubectl create deployment. You got to give a name to this. Okay? And of course, you see that I'm basically trying to create an ng-inx. So I'm going to say ncs ng-inx. So that's the name that I want to give for my deployment. Of course, I got to pull it from the image. Sometimes I need one dash. I think this one is single because it's direct instructions to the container is equal to ng-inx. If you wonder where the image comes from, because I've installed Minikube and the first time I started the service, I'm being asked to log in. Either I can log in via my GitHub, which gets me to the key registry, or I can use Docker. So I've used Docker. So the images that I'm asking for usually comes from the Docker hub, okay, because it depends on whichever container registry I'm attaching my Minikube cluster to. So in this case, I've connected to Docker hub because I've been using this for quite some time. So you can see that I'm pulling the image ng-inx from, oh no, what did I do wrong? Let me check my syntax. Image is equal to, all the instructions that you need here is inside the workshop. Okay, so maybe I have to check it there because I'm very prone for making mistakes. Okay. So let me check my syntax. The scenario is somewhere here. So we started the server. We are creating an ng-inx. Oh no. So my dash is fine, but I don't know. There's some other mistake in my command. So create deployment. Did I do any typo? Let me check. Create deployment looks fine. What did I do? Ah, it's 2 dash. I was a bit doubtful, but let me try. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, it works. Yeah. I think I'm confusing Podman syntax with this. Okay, so it has created a very simple deployment for me. So if you go and say get all, like we did previously, you can see that by default, it creates one deployment, which is for the ng-inx. It also extends that as a service, even though I didn't ask for. The basic image rules is that it creates a service, and it is exposing a cluster IP address so that somebody could reach this NGINX. Right? So if you see why it is doing this, you can Google for your Docker Hub, and then you can look for your NGINX official image. You will see all the instructions there. So if you look at the NGINX tag, and if you try to look inside the file, you can take a particular version and see how the content is. Okay? So you can see that they have basically put in all the instructions that is to create an NGINX version. Okay? So this tells you why the IP address is being assigned, and whatever is being done is basically defaulted from this official instruction image. So now that we have a deployment, I want to play a little bit more to show you that the state management of cluster is quite easy. So how do I do that? I basically say kubectl, and I want to edit this deployment. So I'll say edit, and you got to use the deployment name, in this case ncs nginx. Okay? And when I do this, the default image, deployment image that was used, I think I've got some trouble, nc ngi. I forgot deployment keyword, so I do all this kind of nonsense. Okay? So when I say edit nginx, you can see this is the default repository image that was loaded. Okay? And you can see that the replica set is 1 here. So if I change this to 3, I save it and I run it one more time, you'll see the next time you can create 3 replica sets. This is what we call it as state management. If you want to see for yourself, you can change this to 3. I have not saved my image yet. And what you can do is, you can come here, you can say instead of loading the default NGINX, I can say load NGINX 1.6. I can choose a particular version too. Okay? So I can say I want NGINX 1.6. I think I have to use a colon. Let me check. So if I want to change a version, I got to always use colon. Yeah, that's right. I'm missing that. So I got to say NGINX colon 1.6 version. Okay? So I made 2 changes. I want 3 replicas and I want a particular version of NGINX. So I have to be a bit quick to show you how it works. Okay? So let me keep the command open. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this deployment file and quickly come here and then say kubectl. I have to close this. I was not that fast. No mind. So I got to say kubectl get all, and you can see immediately the 1 replica set is going down and the 3 replica set deployment is taking up. So that's the difference. So you can see that the older one is being garbage collected, a newer form is being created. So if you use the same instruction again, maybe I should say clear and then show you. So I'll use the same instruction again. Now you will see there is a main copy of NGINX and 3 replica sets that are running, all of them roughly 24 seconds because the replica sets I only recently changed. Okay? You see the current version that's already running probably is 1.6. That's why I don't see much change. Maybe I have to say 1.2 or 1.3 for me to see even if the NGINX changes. Okay? So that's basically how your desired state management is done. But it's not just this that is interesting. You know what is interesting is your log files. So let's try to create another deployment. So I'm going to say create deployment. This time I'm going to call the Mongo database because we wanted a database, right? So I'm going to say Mongo, NCS Mongo. The image I'm going to use is the official Mongo image, right? So I'm going to say Mongo. Okay, I'm going to start a deployment here. Now if I simply say get all, you will see that I already have NGINX. Now I'm also using the NCS Mongo to pull a particular image. At that time, it's basically pulling. So if I give this instruction again, it should be running. So you can see that there is a deployment for Mongo and it is working well. Okay? And now what I want to do is I want to see how the log files are. So what you can do is you can say kubectl. Okay? I think you can say logs, okay? And then you can point out to the address of the Mongo, which is basically the NGINX. So in this case, these are replica sets, these are pods. This is the Mongo pods ID. So I'm going to select this. Okay? Edit and copy. So I can put in the IP name. So it basically collects the logs. Okay? So that's why I'm saying even the very free version is very decent in doing performance, log management, scheduling, and even health management and fail safety. Okay? So that's why people like Kubernetes, and it is worth investing to change your on-premise data centers to cloud-native compatible centers. There are so much facilities that come for free. Why should you be paying for Mercury tools or performance tools or scheduling tools? Okay? So the basic cluster is pretty decent enough as long as I can consolidate them all to Linux families. Okay? So that's one of the reasons these days when you procure server, they are discouraging you from procuring Windows server. They want you to look at Linux versions of it. I'm sure it's happening in your company, right? Because everybody, including Azure, wants to go into some centralized operating system, which is Linux based. Okay? So now if you want to delete your, of course, you can clear this and see what your current deployment status is by saying get all. And if you want to delete a particular deployment, you just have to use the same kubectl. You can say instead of create, you're going to say delete deployment. And you got to use the names. I think we call it as NCS NGINX. And then we also, so my typo is instead of kubectl, I said kubectl. So NCS NGINX is not found. Maybe I'll say Mongo. So that is deleted. Why is NGINX, NCS, NG? Oh, I missed an N here. So all that is deleted. So if you go back now, you say kubectl get all, you won't see anything. Okay? So it's back to the cluster. So you can see that instead of you trying to type it every single time, it's a bit boring. You're not the administrator and you're not going to give everything in the shell instruction. As a developer, you want all these things automated. So that's the next stage of demo. Are we good so far? Can I proceed to the next stage? It will only cost you another 10 minutes to extend this demo. So if you have questions, you can ask me. So I'm going to take a Node.js application this time because that's the most popular front end we all struggle with. So what I've done here is I don't want a big application. I minimally want a hello world. That's all. Okay? So you can see in this case, I've created a localhost server 000. I'm opening the port number 3000. I'm simply printing the word hello world on the page. I'm not looking into any single page application or anything yet. It's a very simple web page. Now this is basically my application JS, but this is not enough because I need to build it, right? So we spoke about the package.json and jest yesterday. So I'm not even using jest, as you can see. I've just defined a package. I'm saying this is a Node app. That's all I've done here. Okay? I want to keep it to the bare minimal so that we can focus on the Docker part. So instead of me trying to say create deployment, delete deployment, I'm going to use a tool which is called as Podman. Okay? And for that, I need a compose file that says how the files are going to be. So I'm going to say everything is JSON files, which is the build tool. Whenever I want to run anything, I'm going to use npm. And whatever is in the root file gets copied into the cluster for the application. The port that I'm going to expose in my services are 3000. And usually I will use the Node.js commands npm and start to get my engine running. So I basically document all the shell commands I want to give inside my Docker file. And then I'll write a compose file, which is called as Docker compose, that tells me how the deployment and services should run. In this case, I only want a service, which is the Node.js service. I have to open up the build tool in the current root folder, which is why I said single dot. It loads up the current folder and opens up the port number 3000 and it exposes it exactly as 3000. It's possible that you open a particular port and change the name for the client. Okay? In this case, I want to keep it simple. Whatever is the internal port is what the external client should use as well. So I'm mapping 3000 to 3000. This is a very simple 2 additional files I write. I use a Docker file, I use a Docker compose. Now you can use Docker Desktop to do this as well, but it's not as sophisticated in terms of runtime. So what I'm going to do is I'm using this tool called Podman Desktop. Okay? Slowly you will see that many of your teams will start forcing you to use this kind of Podman Desktop. And I don't have anything else running. I'm just having the Podman cluster on. Okay? So how do you know that? You can use your same visual code to see that. Okay? So when you want to start a Podman, you can say Podman machine. Sorry, I'm typing in the wrong place. So in my terminal, maybe I maximize this terminal. Can I? Okay, so I'll clear this so that the instruction is visible on the front. Right. So when I say Podman machine, start and stop are the instructions. So when I say stop, you can see that the Podman goes down. Okay. I missed a E, so it's a big fuss. I should have used from memory. I have a habit of typing everything. Okay. So the Podman machine has stopped. If you go in here and you refresh the screen, you will see that the Podman takes a minute or two to stop. Okay. And once it is done, you can see if you want to start it again, you just use the same command. Instead of mini cluster, I'm trying to use a tool which is much more helpful for me to start and stop. That's all. Okay. So I can start the mission and stop the mission. Now what is cool about this is I don't have to give individual instructions to do all the entire things. I use this tool called compose. So I'm going to say Podman compose. Okay. You can compose up and down, and I'm going to just use this up so that I can see the entire cluster up. Okay. So I'm going to say create a cluster, use all the instructions from the Docker compose and the Docker file, which will talk about my entire deployment, and do whatever the instructions the compose files wants. And you know that the Docker file wants a Node.js server, it wants a local host, it wants to host the application, and it wants to expose the post 3000. All of them are done here. Okay. How do you test it out? Just open a browser and you have opened the port 30,000, right? So just say localhost colon 3000. You will see, I missed the host. I have too many demos and I have too many ports. I have to specify it every time. So you can see that the hello world basically runs. Okay. Now how is the cluster looking like? So this is what I like about the Podman tool. So when I come in here, you can see it takes a minute or two to refresh. So you can see I have a compose file and I have one active container. Okay. What I like about the Podman tool is I can come in, I can start using this as a terminal and I can do all my bash instructions here. Okay. If I want to see how the logs are, I can select the logs and see how the logs work here. And I can also inspect certain part of my YAML file dynamically here to change my pod status. Okay. And of course, these are the summary details of my container. So my container ID is this. My container is being managed by the Podman container runtime tool. It was 56 seconds since I deployed it and any other details. So it's sort of very easy for me to copy the container ID, the container's unique machine name. It's easy for me to troubleshoot the logs directly here. It's easy for me to give bash instructions directly on the terminal. So I sort of always like this Podman tool over running a plain cluster on the command shell prompt. Okay. So as developers, you will like to run these kind of tools. As administrator, you run the plain cluster. So it depends whether you want to be a platform engineer or you want to be a software data engineer. Software engineers and data engineers like more sophisticated tools like Podman Desktop. Basic platform engineers already have done enough shells, so they allow the basic plain one in a Minikube cluster. Okay. So the instructions for both Kubernetes cluster as well as Podman are there as two different sheets, workshop 01, 02. I'm going to stop the demo here. You can go back and run these examples to see for yourself how these things work. Are we okay with this? I'll stop my demo, but